This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. All the four from Dees. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The Can't Lose Kangas are AFLW premiers.
Hello and welcome back once again to North Pod, and we are here speaking after the first practice match, unofficial practice match, first game against some real opposition for the year. We've played Melbourne in a pretty hot game at Arden Street. Plenty to take out of it. I think based on the reactions I've seen on some social media, there's some pretty unhappy North fans. I'm probably not right there at the moment. I'm kind of in the middle. I didn't really expect too much different from the performance that we got. So, yeah, look, plenty to unpack. I'm going to review it more or less like I plan to review the games this year. I'm, I guess, using this as a bit of my own practice match. So, hopefully my performance is a little bit better than our team's. Yeah, look, the vision was not up to the standard of a regular broadcast. It was just at Arden Street with a 1 or 2 camera setup. So, definitely some things were missed. It's not going to be as polished, I suppose, in my mind, and therefore this product won't be as polished as I would normally want to be. But I think we certainly got the gist of the game through the television screen. So, yeah, let's jump in. I'll talk my way through how I plan to do each game review as we go through the episode. Time for the Roo review, and this is where we're just going to quickly whip through the score, who the team selection news, and how the game overall went. Look, I'm not going to read through the entire squad, but it was pretty close to our best available, and then probably 4 or 5 that you'd look at and go, okay, they're pushing for selection. I think we might have had 27, something like that, in the squad, and then we rotated a few in and out in the second half. Really, Dersma, he had a bit of a shoulder complaint, so he wasn't available. Simpkin didn't end up playing. He was originally named in the squad, but didn't play, and you get the sense that was mostly due to the fact that he played a proper game last week in Perth. Fisher's still a couple of weeks away. CCJ, Goda, and Braden George, and George Wardlaw are all still recovering from their injuries. So they were the players that essentially couldn't be selected, but if you put them aside, we've essentially picked the best side that we could, and then everyone else that didn't play was playing in the VFL Pracky game afterwards. As far as I'm aware, that wasn't televised, so I don't know how that game has gone at this point. But yeah, I guess the notable selections would probably be Finn O'Sullivan's in there, which I think we expected, and then the ones that are on the fringe, Stevens, Taylor Goad, Finbar Maley, Jacob Constanti's an interesting one, I think, as well. Toby Pink, they're probably the ones that I would suspect are most likely to fall out of the round 1 side, but still a couple of weeks there still to come. And most of those that I listed there didn't play most of the game, which I think speaks to the fact that they're probably more on the fringe. So Eddie Ford is an interesting one that missed out based on how well he played last week. Bryn Teakle, we're seeing from this, did not get the call up. Jack Darling was the second tall forward, and we didn't have a third. As you'd expect, players like Miller Bergman, Callan Dawson, these types didn't feature in the side, so we're playing VFL. So that's how we went in, but ostensibly we were going for pretty much the best available that we could select for the first half, and then as the second half wore on, we subbed a few out, namely Stevens, Goad, Pink and Maley were the ones that came in either in the third quarter or at 3-quarter time. In the end, we lost 117-71. It was really hot. It was blustery. Conditions mostly favoured one end. But like I said, it was blustery, so it wasn't necessarily just a gale blowing down towards that end. It was difficult conditions for kicking, just due to the wind, and just difficult conditions for a pre-season game because it was so hot. So obviously that's going to impact your fitness, and it's going to impact your ability to run out the game. We hung in there until about 3-quarter time, and then we got blown out in the last quarter when we sort of made a few changes, and we certainly looked fatigued. We looked like our structures fell apart a little bit in that fatigue. And like I said, we swapped a few players out. Larky and Sherry, for example. Aiden Core didn't play that last term. I don't think Finn O'Sullivan did either. So definitely made some changes. But also, it all fell a little bit apart into a heap in that last quarter. The Dees definitely fielded a weaker side. They were missing the likes of May and Petrarca, Gawn, Fritsch, Salem, Viney, Langdon. There's probably a few more that you could list that are definitely best 23 players for them that did not play. Clayton Oliver was one that did play and was pretty heavily featured. He looked like he was getting back towards the kind of form that he was in 2 years ago before last season's controversy. So he was a bit of a handful. But yeah, in general, the skills were pretty sloppy from both sides, but certainly our skills were a little bit worse as the game went on. And yeah, as that last quarter at times, it was just each side kicking at 50 metres in the opposite direction straight to a teammate, straight to an opposition player. So yeah, that last quarter was pretty horrific at times and definitely had the signs that it was a pre-season game. Not a lot that was surprising in terms of how we went about it, really. Larky and Darling were the marking targets inside 50. There were crummers at their feet with Curtis and Constanti, Hansen, Cam Zerha, and then some resting mids. Were all crumbing and at various times playing their roles. We did try to take the game on with quick play and then went long when that kind of started and didn't work for us. So pretty similar to how we tried to play at times last year. The defence was really leaky. We were really vulnerable to similar things we were to last year. That fast ball movement through the middle. As soon as there's one-on-ones in defence, we're pretty cooked, unfortunately. So similar weaknesses or areas of concern to last year. But you look, like I say, I'm not getting too concerned given it is not even an official preseason game. It's a scratch match. It's match simulation. I just don't read as much into it. I guess the fact that we're playing Melbourne, I think it's round 2 or 3, it's pretty early on, is something worth considering as well. Like, you don't really want to show them tactically everything that we're wanting to do. And Clarko wasn't even really coaching today. It seemed as though the assistants were really doing the majority of the decision making. The commentators were talking about how Clarko was just sitting in a different box, didn't have a headset on, and really wasn't actively involved. I know Lee Adams did the post-game presser, so I think that speaks to how seriously, in terms of the tactics, we were taking this game. That being said, the players themselves don't go out there to do anything other than play their best, so we can certainly speak to individual performances from that sense. In terms of what Melbourne brought, I mean, Kasai Pickett, his pace and strength through the middle was a real issue. He smashed us in transition and out of the middle several times, and just we've seen players of that archetype beat us like that before, so that's a concern. And then down forward, Melbourne had Van Rooyen as their main target. They had Turner as the sort of second big target. Van Rooyen was, just doing it for fun, really. He made our tall defenders look pretty shoddy at times, was really dangerous in the air, took lots of marks, and again, that was we know that's an issue. It's been an issue for us last year. As soon as the ball goes in high and long, unless we've had enough time to get numbers back there, we're in strife. And even if we do, we just don't have that really tall timber yet in the side to defend. So, look, that's definitely still going to be an area of weakness for us. I don't think having Griffin Logue come back in is going to solve the problem, and I guess that's going to take us to the next segment. Story of the game. This has not changed from last year. I guess it's just the big moment or the important element that I think was the decisive factor or a deciding factor in the game. And no surprises here. Our defensive structures are not going to be simply fixed because Griffin Logue's playing back in the side for us. We were vulnerable through the corridor, and let's be honest, lots of sides are vulnerable through the corridor. Teams set up to try and push opposition teams to go around the boundary and then sort of squeeze them, and if you can bite off those dangerous, tricky kicks, often you can get space through the middle, and that we saw Melbourne were able to do that more as the game went on. Unfortunately, I think that the thing that worried me was they were able to do it both ways. So they could cut us up with that transition, but as soon as we turned the ball over at around half forward, our transition defense was just not there. We let Melbourne far too easily waltz through and essentially take uncontested marks in their forward line. So that's why the likes of Van Rooyen and Sharp were able to kick so many goals. They've got so many one-on-one opportunities in the forward line. So part of that is our defensive structure. Part of that's the fact that we just turned it over in horrible places like we so often do. But part of that is the personnel. Like the personnel in the defence hasn't changed dramatically from last year. We've brought in Caleb Daniel, who does not play a defensive role. He's that rebounder. He's playing that McKercher role from last year, the Harry Sheezel role from the year before. Whilst obviously he's playing in the back pocket, he does have an opposition player. He's primarily there to try and get the ball out of defence. Griffin Logue's come back in. He only played a couple of games last year, and I think he'll get better with reps. You know, he's missed a lot of football across the last couple of years, but none of those players down there are absolutely tall timber, and none of them, I guess, are elite defenders. You know, Aiden Corr's the most experienced. He certainly lacks in a little size, and I thought he was probably our best of the defender or the tall defenders on the day, but certainly wasn't a game that is going to feature heavily on his highlight reels. You know, Chom can take a couple of intercepts. I thought he was okay when he was able to play loose, but most of the time he wasn't. The time that he was most prolific was when they did that match scenario simulation at the end of the second quarter, in which Melbourne was trying to defend an 8-point lead, which obviously meant that a lot of Melbourne's forwards rushed forward. It left Chom free, and he was able to get a couple of intercept marks. They were kind of cheapies in the end when you think of it through that lens. So, look, the defence is still not a strength of ours. Jacko Archer, you know, battled really hard and attacked the footy really well at times, but overall our defensive craft, I think, still leaves a fair bit to be desired across the ground. I think the fact that that's more or less the best team that we can put together in terms of defensive craft is the part that worries me the most. We do have some young players waiting in the wings, don't get me wrong, but they're not really ready yet. It's not as if they're banging down the door. Sure, Whitlock had some really good moments in the intra-club last week, but he's still very raw and young. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that he's going to come in and make a big impact. Same with big shotty Will Dawson. So raw. I think there's a lot to like about him in terms of a prospect, but, you know, played 2 or 3 AFL games, and he would definitely add that height if he was able to come in, but we saw him last year just get beaten in the lead so easily. He's still got to work on a lot of his game. So, you know, putting those two aside, we've got Cal Dawson, Riley Hardiman, Josh Goda, Miller Bergman are those kind of defensively minded players that we didn't or couldn't select. And I just don't know that any of those are going to be ready to take much more responsibility on this year. So I guess that's the thing. But that being said, it's not just on the defenders. It's that pressure up the ground. And as the game went on, that really dropped off, which, you know, is understandable in the heat. But it's, you know, I'm sure this is kind of ringing true and sounding familiar to many of the listeners. It's an issue that's plagued us over the past couple of years. So I guess if you're thinking about, you know, what did we want to see coming into a practice game, you probably want to see some improvement in our ability to defend as a team, and I just didn't see any signs of that in this particular game. I'm not writing us off at the moment. I think there's plenty of time, and I'll probably wait and see what the first month of real football looks like before I start getting concerned that there's been no progress. But there's definitely cause for a bit of, you know, Luke McDonald battled but gave away some silly free kicks and just got out-bodied too often for me. Jackson Archer's still so raw. He's got that really great ability to run for the football and runs at it really hard, but sometimes as a result of that can overrun it or can overcommit. So, you know, you put those kinds of things alongside the fact that our tools are a little undersized, and, you know, Jacob Van Rooyen is a great player, but he's also young. He shouldn't be making us look silly. He's kind of a similar profile to someone like Chom. He's played more footy than Chom, but, you know, they're a similar profile in that they're both young and developing, and Van Rooyen was fantastic. So hopefully we can see an improvement in the defensive craft when we play West Coast next week. But that's one to watch, I think. It's not just the defence, it's the turnovers up the field, and it's that transition defence as a group that I think adds up and then makes the defensive group look worse than possibly they are. Shim owner of the week. This is the highlight player or highlight play of the game. Big mark, could be a big chase down tackle. Just, I guess, a moment from a player or a group of players that was a highlight. And I think you can't go past Tommy Powell's torpedo last quarter, so the game was virtually done. Although at this point, we were still sort of in it. This was early in the last before it all completely fell apart. Bit of a contest on half forward. Tommy Powell gathers it and just gets it quickly on his boot from about 60 out. He's kicking with the wind, so we'll give him that, but it was a low torp that just then took an off break, bounced straight through for a goal. Really nasty for the Melbourne defenders, that type of ball, but it's really hard to read with the wind and the fact that it's a torp, and then takes a really hard, sharp right-hand turn to go through for a goal. We know he's a torpedo king. He had that massive bomb last year that features heavily in highlights packages. So he's done it again. This one probably less intentional, but still a fantastic effort to get the ball that far. And he played a good game, Tommy Powell, overall. It wasn't one of his best performances, but in a game that didn't feature too many highlights for either side, really, there was a big mark. I think it was from Turner, maybe, on the wing, and Charlie Coleman tried to take a similar mark later on, but didn't quite put it all together. Not a super highlight-filled game, but Tommy Powell's goal, probably the last good thing that happened for us in the game, to be honest, because after that, it was a bit of an onslaught of Melbourne goals. So, Shimboner of the week, Tommy Powell. And then we move into the North Podium voting. So this is going to be a little bit different to last year. As I said off the top, I'm still exactly figuring out how I'd like this to work. But the gist is I'm trying to follow a format that's actually quite similar to the North Melbourne best and fairest voting. So I'm moving away from the four best and giving them 4, 3, 2, 1. Instead, what I'm doing is making the votes available to any player and then just classifying them in this way. So a player could get 4 votes if they had a game-winning elite performance without any major fault. So the way I'm, I guess, trying to envision that is it's only going to be one player, and it most likely won't. No one will get the 4 votes. It has to be a really amazing individual performance. So I can tell you in this game that no one got the 4 votes. I think for me that's the pinnacle performance. Is those ones where they say that there's 3 vote Brownlow games and there's 3 vote Brownlow games. To me, that's the one where you'd go, gee, you wish you'd give them an extra. So that's what a 4 vote game would look like. A 3 vote game would be a great game, positive impact, not too many errors. And so that could just be a best on ground performance, a standard best on ground performance. Again, I don't give any 3 votes out for this game, so you can kind of see where I'm trying to sit the benchmark, I guess. The 2 and 1, there are some for this game. So 2 votes would be a good game, positive impact, not too many errors. So, a good positive contribution to the game. And lastly, the 1 vote would be you've played your role successfully, or perhaps you had a couple of big moments, but you drifted in and out of the game. So that's the system. And I'm going to see how that feels. I'm giving myself the license to fiddle a bit around with the wording of those, I guess, or the classifications. But I think that's the gist. My goal there is that hopefully we're able to see a bit more of an even contribution between different types of players. The defenders in particular, I think often it's hard to find a way to slip them into the votes, and I think this will make it easier to do that, but who knows? I think ultimately any system does tend to still favour players that are going to get involved more often. So anyway, I guess we'll see how we go. Obviously, it's not the real season yet, so these votes aren't going to be tallied for the end of year North Podium standings. However, I thought for the exercise, we'll give out some votes. So Harry Sheezel, Colby McKercher, Nick Larkey, and Will Phillips, I gave 2 votes apiece. I thought Sheezel and McKercher were just, fantastic at transitioning that ball. They were the primary reason that once Caleb Daniel had got that first kick, and sometimes he'd do a bit of a 1-2 and he'd have a follow-up possession, but once he'd gotten it out of defensive 50, it was those 2 that were doing the heavy lifting in terms of transitioning and kicking it high up the ground. We saw a couple of really good bullets from Harry Sheezel. We saw Colby McKercher take it on through the middle with a few bounces a couple of times. One of them, he took it on and then shanked the kick, unfortunately, which kind of spoke to our our capacity to, I guess, finish our work. We had a couple of really good build-ups that just didn't quite work out, and that was probably emblematic of some of those efforts. But the two of them were fantastic. McKercher was mostly playing a wing role, so hence that's why he was getting involved in those chains. Whereas Sheezel seemed to be playing a bit all over the ground. He's certainly spent some time through the midfield. He's certainly spent some time up forward. I don't know if he spent some time off halfback. I saw him a few times in the defensive 50, but that could have well been when he was, playing midfield and he was just down that end of the ground. But he was certainly playing a more flexible role and eased his way in. I thought his start to the game was a bit quiet, but yeah, by the end, I think the two of them were the best at transitioning the ball through that Melbourne defence. Larky kicked 3 goals. He looked dangerous every time he got an opportunity. I thought he was fantastic in the 3 quarters that he played, and it seems like he's going to be another focal point for us this year, which is fantastic. He's just going to repeat what he's been able to do for the last few. So, love to see more of that from him. And Wilfield, I think, was just super impressive in terms of providing link up, and his tackling pressure was fantastic too. He had some good clearance work, and when he wasn't winning the clearances, he was pretty good at laying a tackle. He's giving some great hands. I thought he had a couple of really good kicks. He hit Jack Darling with a really perfect over-the-top kick inside 50 that Darling spilt. But, I thought he was super composed. And, it could be a bolter. I know I picked him as a player that was really going to stamp himself in my predictions. I didn't know on what basis. At that time, I didn't know that George Wardlaw was going to unfortunately do a hammy. And, let's be honest, I think that's opened the door for someone like Wilfield to get some minutes. I think based on how he played in this game, he will play round 1. So, he was fantastic. And then the 1 votes, Caleb Daniel, Luke Davies-Uniacke, Tom Powell, Paul Curtis, and Aidan Corr. So, as you can see, there's 9 players in total there getting some votes, but no one at the top end, which is, I think, what you'd expect in a performance like this where we weren't quite able to finish our work. Caleb Daniel was, he was brilliant at what he was brought over to do. He had some good kicking out of defence and a couple of 1-2s, a couple of shaky moments, but I think overall he played his role. LDU had some moments of brilliance, but didn't do it consistently, I don't think. Had a moment there where he stepped several players. He showed that ability to move it sideways and do a bit of a shake and bake. He was good in patches, but didn't quite put it together the way that we saw him do for most of last year. I think Power was kind of similar. Some highlights like the torp, but probably wasn't putting it together for a fully contained good game. Paul Curtis really impressed me with his crumbing ability. I liked the fact that he was able to hit those packs with some speed, kicked a goal or two, and looked dangerous. I was a bit disappointed with his lack of discipline late in the game, gave up a 50-metre penalty, and we've seen that from him before. It continues to frustrate me. I just wish that we could stamp that out of his game. I get it's hard in the heat of battle, but I think for me that's a big thing that's going to stop him at the moment from becoming an elite small forward or medium forward in his case, because he gives up too many free kicks and 50-metre penalties. So that was the ding on him and probably what bumped him down from a 2 to a 1. And then, like I mentioned it earlier on, I think Aidan Corr was the best of the defenders. Mostly played his role, didn't really get beaten, was able to spoil several times, took a couple of good marks and launched some attacks, but not a remarkable game by any stretch. I thought he played his role before he. I'm fairly sure he went off at 3/4 time or just before. So that's the North Podium voting. That's the format. Probably when we get to the real stuff, I will be able to give some stats like I usually do for those players of the game. It was just difficult to do that when there wasn't official stats available for this game. So that's the way I plan to do it. And then like last year, we'll tally up the votes across the year and see who sits atop the North Podium come the end of the year. If you're enjoying the show, I'd really appreciate if you could support me and support the show by sharing the show with any North Melbourne fans that you know, subscribing on your chosen podcast service, giving the show a rating or a review. It really helps promote the show and for others to see it for discoverability. You can follow me on my socials, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, at NorthPodShow or NorthPod. And if you'd like to support me more, you can find my Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. I really appreciate all of the support that you, the listeners, and the North Melbourne fans out there have given me over the past couple of years. It's been fantastic, and I'm looking forward to another fantastic year in 2025. Kanga Clipboard is the next segment that I'm launching this year, and really, it's just a rebranding of the positives and negatives. I thought at times it was hard to, differentiate. Some things were a negative that ended with a positive. Some things it was just a comment. So we're going with the Kanga Clipboard, and the goal here is just to unpack some things from the game that, are worth discussing in a bit more detail. So firstly, I think particularly early in the game, as the game kind of went on, it became a little bit messier. But I thought our structure seemed to be pushing a long way up the ground in this game. Paul Curtis was finding himself up at stoppages at half-back, pushing all the way up as that half-forward role. We were leaving our forward 50 empty at times and providing that space to run back with the flight. A lot higher. We didn't seem to leave anyone at home at all at times, whereas normally we'd see Larky or Paul Curtis as those deepest forwards that pretty much stay, maybe at the top of the inside 50 and then move back as the ball's coming up. There were times where it was just empty and we were all running back with the flight. So I don't know if that was just something we were trying out, but it's definitely something worth noting. We did get it working a couple of times, but usually our transition broke down and we weren't clinical enough to actually convert it into a score. Worth seeing if that continues next week, I guess, or if that was just a bit of a trial. I don't love it. I think for me, I love to always have that option of a player leading up with the ball, but I understand that generally speaking, if you do that, you do open yourselves up to, a loose player intercepting because they're going to sag off in that instance. So look, for me, I would prefer to have someone, a full forward role playing, even if they're playing super, super deep. For me, I'd prefer that, but it does, playing this style or giving this style a go does allow you to try those slingshots and get teams out the back. So there's pros and cons to it, but yeah, I think in order for it to work, you've just got to be a bit more clinical than we were able to be. Our kicking or our finishing in terms of our marking probably wasn't quite up to scratch for what we were trying to achieve with that style of play. Another thing worth noting, we saw it in the scratch match last week, but Jack Darling did play the second ruck role. I think personally I prefer that to Nick Larkey playing it. I really would prefer that Larkey spent all of his time deep in the forward line. I don't mind if he takes some stoppages when the ball's inside forward 50. I can see the value of that. But I would prefer, Jack Darling taking that, even if it means we're probably going to just give up those contests. He's pretty undersized for a ruckman, Jack Darling. He's only sort of low 190s, I think. Although he plays bigger than that, he's a big man. Yeah, I thought he was fine in the ruck. He won a couple of clearances. He'll be useful when the ball hits the deck, for sure, because he's not that lumbering ruckman size. But I think for me, that's the thing that makes the most sense. It probably does mean it's going to be hard for Bryn Teakle to get a spot in the side, because I just can't see a world in which we'd want that to happen, unless for some reason we want to go really tall in a game, and then you could slightly upgrade our second ruck stocks. Ultimately, Tristan Sherry is going to ruck 80 to 90% of the game, so it's just going to be such short bursts that someone else needs to go in there anyway. I'm pretty happy with Darling doing it. I'm sure there are times where maybe you look at, I wonder if Chom could do it. It's just weird to have one of your defenders playing that part-time ruck role, and do you want to throw Chom in there as a player that has been injury prone? I'm not too sure. I think for me, Sherry is obviously your number one ruck, and then Darling as your backup, and then you've got options in the game. If you do want to throw someone else in there, you can do so with Nick Larkey. You've got Chom as a weird option, or even Cam Zerha, again, undersized, but if you want to try something different, you've got options there. And then as the year progresses, someone like Bryn Teakle might come in. Who knows, maybe even Taylor Goad comes in, we play two rucks. I can't see that happening, but at least we can see that Goad's going to be a competitive ruckman. He's got some craft now. He's put on some bulk. I think if Sherry was to get injured, cross our fingers and toes that doesn't happen. But I think at least we know we've got a competent backup now, which is promising. Goad only played the last quarter. He had a couple of moments. One really positive one. He won a hold in the ball from a follow-up, but then soon after that, gave away an unnecessary downfield free kick. So he's got some work to do. I think he's a promising prospect for later on in his career, and I think he'll play some really good VFL footy this year, whereas last year he spent a lot of time in defence. He was playing some weird roles in the VFL. Hopefully this year he's able to, do what he should do. Finbar Maley is, I guess, the other ruck option that I didn't mention. And again, a little bit undersized. He's more of a second ruck. And so I could see a situation in which we decide that we want to give him a go later in the year if his kicking was to improve. But yeah, like I said, I'm pretty happy with Darling doing that for now. The forward half pressure is something that we know last year we really needed to work on. It's been an issue for us for quite some time, and I thought in the first half it was actually pretty impressive. That's a big reason that Jacob Constanti has been brought across, and he's in contention for the side in round one. And you can see why. He did apply some really positive pressure. He tackled well. He attempted to smother. I just think he's got to be a bit more of a goal threat long term. I'm not saying that he needs to be that right now. I think we'd give him some grace to develop. I think he had 2 or 3 years on the Sydney list, so he's still very young. And I probably at this stage am leaning towards the fact that he won't be in the round one side, but look, there's every chance. I thought he applied some good pressure. Robert Hansen Jr. applied some good pressure before it looked to me as though he got a little tired. He certainly didn't have the same impact that he did in the intra-club. Paul Curtis and Jack Darling, similarly, I thought in the first half applied some good tackling pressure. Paul Curtis was actually quite frenetic at times. His running and chasing was fantastic. But yeah, as the game went on and our turnovers accumulated, I think our pressure decreased, our ability to give second efforts decreased, which is, again, expected in the weather and expected in the first real hit out. But we're not quite good enough at this stage to afford that volume of errors. And we weren't able to sustain that level of pressure across the whole game. So improved early on, and we saw that impact the scoreboard. We were able to get some repeat stoppages and create some goals. Will Phil had a good goal from a stoppage that showed his craft and showed the capacity for those tackles to be rewarding. But we've got to find a way to sustain that longer. Cam Zerha's one that I'd like to see applying more pressure and more tackles. He didn't have much of an impact in this game. I'd like to see more of that from him. And Luke Parker is one. He didn't spend a lot of time forward, but his capacity to tackle, I think, will be a big game changer. He's not going to be a big chaser, but when the ball's in close, I think we'll see him win us some holding the balls or some repeat stoppages inside 50 because he's just such a strong player. The last note on the Kanga clipboard here. Look, it's pre-season, so it's the old let's give it a grain of salt. But seeing a lot of the same things from last year, it didn't look to me as though we were dramatically different in any sense. We turned it over a lot at half forward. At times we broke it open. We got deep one-on-ones, and then we fumbled or we missed kicks that would have guaranteed us a good shot on goal. And I think so many times last year we did things like that. Conversely, we leaked scoring chances on the turnover, and just essentially sold out our defenders. Didn't give them any real chance to shut down Melbourne forwards because they just kept getting in there fast. And we know if forwards get the ball in fast, unless you have an absolute elite defence with really good one-on-one players, which we do not, it's going to be really hard. So how often last year were we saying these kinds of things? We weren't able to finish our work and we weren't able to defend turnover, and we created too many turnovers, which allowed oppositions to get a run on. We saw in the last quarter Melbourne, without completely busting the damn wall, they more or less did. It was a 46-point win in the end. And whilst sure, you could argue that there was some, fun time at the end, it wasn't necessarily, a competitive game by the end. I think it's a little bit of a worry that we were conceding that easily and were unable to score in that last quarter when we'd only made a small handful of changes. It's not as though we subbed out half the side. It was 3 or 4 players that we changed. So that is a concern. I think the forward half disposal efficiency in that second half was awful, which again, would sound pretty familiar. The kicking inside 50, I thought in the first half wasn't too bad. Wilfield and Tommy Powell at times, and Harry Sheezel were fantastic going inside 50 or kicking in the front half. As the game went on, that certainly deteriorated. But yeah, for me, the big concern is a lot of these things are issues that we knew last year have been problems, and they've been problems for more than a year. So you would hope that we're going to see some improvement. I don't expect these things to change overnight, but I think we were looking for a bit of progress, and I don't know that we saw a lot of that in this game. But that being said, when we played Collingwood in that scratch match last year, it looked like we'd fixed all of our ball movement problems and we were off to the races, and we know that how that turned out. So I think for me, that's where you've got to just remember it's a preseason game. There's so much that we don't know in terms of what we want to do tactically. It's also the first real head out. There's going to be some errors and some mistakes and some missed kicks that comes with the territory. So for me, I'm not sitting here completely concerned and feeling down the dumps about it, but I'm also not looking at it going, whoa, I think we're going to shoot up the ladder this year. I think it's too early to tell, and I think a practice game just doesn't give you any capacity to make any of those connections with any certainty, really. Normally, I'll go to the next segment, which would be around Arden Street, which is where we'll talk about any news that's happened during the week. Not a lot to talk about at the moment, given it's pre-season, so we're going to skip over that segment and go straight to the game for next week, which I mentioned earlier on. We're playing West Coast at Bunbury, so getting a bit of a look at our home ground for later in the year. Saturday, the 1st of March, 6:10 p.m. Melbourne time, so an afternoon game in Perth. And I'm looking forward to seeing some more experimentation and probably some opportunity for some of those players that only play a little bit of game time this week. Maybe we do see other fringe players like Eddie Ford, for example. Maybe Miller Bergman's one that could come in. Maybe if Zane Dursman's fit, we see him come in. It's going to be interesting to see if he plays midfield or forward, or a combination of when he's playing some real opposition. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I think at least it is now a practice match as opposed to match simulation next week. So, it's more of an official game. And whilst I think we'll probably not play as strong a side, I think the expectations go up a level for me when you're playing an official practice match. Nothing's going to compare to what's actually the expectations of real football, but this was match simulation. I think both sides go in wanting to do some pretty specific things and not necessarily show all their cards right off the bat. So yeah, look, interesting. It'll be good to get away to Bunbury and see what that ground is like. Because as we know, it's going to be a home ground for us in the middle part of the year. And probably also good to play West Coast, a team that we'd expect to be somewhere around the same area of the ladder. That being said, you could probably argue the same for Melbourne. It's so hard to predict what Melbourne's going to do this year. If they're able to get it all together and their culture gels and they're able to have their stars stay fit, I could totally see a situation where they're challenging for a premiership. They're in that kind of 3rd to 7th on the ladder, but I could also see a situation where it all just crumbles and they're in that bottom 6. So hard to know. They beat us pretty comfortably with a lot of their seconds. So I don't know that gives you much for benchmark for what to expect from them. But yeah, looking forward to next week. It's another step towards round 1 and another step towards the real football, and hopefully we get a bit more of a sense for what we can expect from the side moving forward. Because like I said, match simulation, there wasn't a lot to love about this game, but I'm not hitting the alarm bells just yet for me. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be plenty of opportunity to hit the alarm bells, I think, this year, but it's not yet. Hopefully this new match review format gels with you. I've it's not too different from what I've done in the past, but I've just tried to reorganize a few things and keep things fresh. So feel free to give me some feedback on how you like the slightly new format. I'll give it another go next week for the practice game, and then hopefully we've got all those things in order for round 1. I know exactly how I'd like to do things. yeah, it should be good. I'm excited for the season. I feel like everyone's always excited for the season in February and March when, anything's possible. We'll see how we feel by May, but it's always an exciting time because there's possibilities. And I think as North fans, what we want is improvement. We're not sitting here wanting to make the 8. I mean, let me rephrase. We'd love to make the 8. We're not expecting to make the 8. We just want to see some improvement. We didn't necessarily see that in this game, but again, it's a scratch match. It doesn't mean a lot. Hopefully we can get some more out of next week against West Coast, and if not, we just pretend that the preseason doesn't matter, and we'll go for round 1. Yeah, I think that's gonna do us for the pod. Thanks for listening as always. Really appreciate your support. And again, if you could share the podcast with any North Melbourne people that I would really appreciate it. I'll speak to you in about a week's time after we've played West Coast and are hopefully still Kings of Perth and coming home with a win. That would be nice to get another preseason win and go into round 1 with some actual game confidence rather than some hypothetical confidence. Have a fantastic week, and as always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.